here we can account for it in the feature system, because we say that what is a fake pass? It's a pass with a feature combination u pass u sub, and it's checked by an irrealis operator. But then you can of course ask, what is this irrealis operator? How can we motivate it? When it comes to the semantics, the irrealis operator unfortunately doesn't do much. So it's a bit like, I mean, we have the conditional mood in Romance languages, and this shows that there is something special about the construction, and we maybe want to mark it somehow. And the irrealis operator is, in the system, a way of marking that we have this special construction. But it doesn't do much semantically, so we treat it simply as the identity function semantically. But it has the feature combination I passed and I sub. But still I haven't really motivated it properly. And I will do that in a few minutes. I'll come back to that. But we should keep it in mind. What is actually the irrealis operator doing? And another question is, what about this b in Slavic? Could that be an overt instantiation of the irrealis operator? That's also an interesting question to keep in mind. So let's look at the analysis of past subjunctive conditionals. So what do we have here? We have the irrealis operator with the feature combination interpretable past, interpretable subjunctive. And this feature combination checks the would, and it checks the past morphology of have. But then in addition we have the have from the matrix takes scope over the would, over the modal functor. And the have has a feature I perfect, interpretable perfect, which checks the perfect auxiliary have here. So we see that had actually has three uninterpretable features. It has a feature u past, u subjunctive, and u perfect. This neatly shows that when we see a word like have or had in counterfactual conditionals, many things go on. So the have had auxiliary itself, as it is used in Germanic and Romance languages, is clearly ambiguous. So have with wide scope is interpreted as a past time shifter. That is a real semantic have. But the had in the antecedent, when it has this special feature combination, u past, u sub, and u perf, we have a stylistic or a special rule in Germanic Romance languages that we can delete it or interpret it as identity. You may say that that is not so nice. Why do we have this special rule that with this feature combination we can ignore the had in the antecedent? Well, it's not nice, but nobody has really anything to say about this as far as I know. If you have anything to say about it, please ask me questions about it or comment on it. In the temporal mismatch cases, where we, for instance, have a future shift in the consequent, this is the future shift in the consequent is covert, which is not so nice that it's covert, but this is due to the impoverished morphological system of Germanic and Romance languages. So we cannot have constructions like I would have will be in a hunter. So we cannot have a non-finite form of will. Will cannot be a perfect participle. And therefore we have to introduce the future operator here simply as a covert future shifter. But the point about this is that if we could express it, then we would not have been allowed to introduce covert operators. But since it's impossible by the grammar, then we are allowed to introduce covert operators. Now comes maybe the nicest evidence for the covert irrealis operator, and that is from German, because if the modal in German is not a must, but if it's a possibility modal, and it's in the past, then we see that hätte takes scope over können in this case. So it's a sentence Jeg setter skriver out i können. We see that hette takes scope over können, but hette has subjunctive morphology. And if können were the model which licenses subjunctive morphology, it cannot be under hette. So since hette has subjunctive morphology, this shows that we need something more abstract above canon, above the model. And this is where the irrealis operator comes in. An important point, I think, is that the bui in Russian, I don't know what your intuitions are about bui, but it cannot be the must operator. There are many reasons for that. One reason is that, so it cannot be the main modal functor of the construction. One reason is that we have it also in the antecedent, and it makes no point to have a must operator in the antecedent. What I will argue is that bui is a local irrealis marker. And I will show here how you can do it. So, yes, on захотел, он мог бы остаться здесь. So this is a nice example because we have an overt modal in Russian. So we have mok, which is the main modal functor, and it shows that it isn't bui that is the main modal functor, because we can have mok as we had können in German in the previous example. So how does this work? Well, the bui here has two features, I pass and I sub. So bui is an overt manifestation of irrealis, so it has the same feature combination. And it can check the past morphology of mok. So this fake past of mok is checked by bui. But since Russian is a non-sequence of tense language, we need bui also in the consequent. So it checks, this is the consequent mok, which is the main modal functor, but we need it also in the antecedent. So here bui checks захотел. So to sum up on bui is not the main modal functor, bui is not subjunctive morphology, but bui is an irrealis marker, and bui is semantically empty. But it is needed to show that we have fake tense, and it is needed to license the fake tense, because it has this feature combination I pass, I sub. It can license or check the fake tense construction. Notice that in Russian counterfactual conditionals, you can also have antecedents without bui, for instance, budyon, zdarov, и так далее. So that could be an antecedent of a conditional. That construction shows that bui is not really necessary if you don't have a tensed verb form. So bui is only necessary if you have a tensed verb form. Then you need the bui to check the feature combination past and subjunctive. So what happens then if you have a covert past in Russian counterfactual conditionals? So если вы вчера вечером компания болел, он остался бы дома. What happens here? So Russian doesn't have the perfect auxiliary. So Russian is, in this respect, quite poor when it comes to the morphological inventory. And that means that we can, in some cases, introduce a covert past operator. We are forced to that in some cases. Like in the Germanic and Romance cases, we were forced to introduce the covert future shifter in some cases. And similarly in Russian, we are sometimes forced to introduce a covert past. I will give you one example which I find quite nice in this respect. This is an authentic example. So since you are mostly native speakers of Russian, I guess you can take the point here. So он знал, как утром за завтраком они с восторгом сообщат, что им обоим снился один и тот же сон. And then there is this thought. Одинаковых снов не бывает, скажет им отец, который уже вернется с ночного дежурства и будет завтракать вместе с ними. Который уже вернется. There is no past morphology here, but if you look at the meaning, it's clearly a past shifter, because we have the уже. And in Germanic languages, we need to use the past here. and we use the future perfect, who will already have returned. So we need to go, in Germanic we can actually combine will and have here. But in Slavic you cannot combine will and have, and therefore in this case you can actually have a covert past in the semantics in logical form, although it's not there in the morphosyntax. And this then is what happens here in We have a covert past. It has a feature I past. And exceptionally, this I past is not licensed it doesn't check a U past. So this is an exception in the system, but it is because there is no morphological possibility of expressing it in Russian, so it is a problem in the Russian system. Notice that in Germanic or Romance we could not introduce a covert past like this, which doesn't check anything. Because in Romance and Germanic we can actually express it, and then we have to express it. In Russian we cannot express it, and then it has to be covert. So the buoy here actually checks the fake tense of Valiel, and the second buoy the fake tense of Astalsa. So the conclusions then, the general architecture looks something like this. We have an Irialis operator, which I assume for all languages, although this may be strictly necessarily not for all the languages, but only for some. I will come to that on the next slide. And then, if it's a past subjective conditional, we can either have a covert past like in Russian, or we can have the overt have like in Germanic and Romance. We delete the had in the antecedent, mostly we delete it in all the languages we discussed here. The must is either covert, or it can be an overt would as in English. So would is the main functor in English. The conditional ire construction is the overt functor in French or in Romance, but in German and Russian the must is covert. The verb forms like would, had, came, etc. They have the feature combination u past u sub in this construction, and then they are checked by the Irialis operator. Of course, they could also be simple past, but then they must be checked by a past tense. Aspect is dealt with locally, and I will not discuss it here. Have is mostly O-scoping the bare conditional in Germanic and Romance, but it's covert in Russian. And then this is a covert past. The SOT rules are used in checking the features in the antecedent, and there is a special deletion rule for had in the antecedent in Germanic and Romance. The abstract Irialis operator is needed at least in German, we saw that. The same goes for Spanish and Italian, because it has subjunctive morphology on the antecedent. So it's needed at least in those languages. In English, there is an alternative, which I will not go into. But in Russian, the ir is not there as a covert operator, but it's an overt buoy. But since Russian is non-sequence of tense, the buoy occurs twice, both in the matrix and in the antecedent. So that's it. That's all.
I didn't see the point about tense marking in English constructions with when referring to future. So when he comes, I will be there, for instance. The same is impossible in any other tense. So why don't they say in English something like I told, I said it when they come. Why the same same relative tense marking is unavailable in past but only in future?
This example, because it's not the traditional example. The traditional example is of course with complement tense. So John said that he was happy. So with complement tense we have sequence of tense because we have a past in the matrix and the past shares a past feature with the past and the subordinate. And the past and the subordinate there is not interpreted as a real past, so we have simultaneity. Here we have simultaneity, and the comes is shares a present tense feature with will, but in your example, he said that he will. He said that no, he.
When?
Okay, so he. I told him when he comes, so something like that. That is impossible because told has a past feature, and he cannot transmit a past feature to the present comes. So there is a feature conflict. But the point there is that will has a present feature, so it's semantically it's morphologically a present. So we don't see the morphology here so clearly, but it is a present, so it should be John wills, right? John comes, John wills. So it is a present tense in English, and that is the whole point. And that's why we have sequence of tense there. If we had a past tense told, we could not get feature transmission because then there will be a feature conflict.
A follow-up, I just don't remember what's here in French.
What?
What's in French in this example?
Okay.
Je le dirai quand il arrive.
Yeah, so quand il arrive ou quand il arrivera. Yeah, so je lui dirai quand il arrivera, quand il arrive. I agree with you that, so this is a good question because if French is a pure sequence of tense language, you will expect je lui dirai quand il arrive with the present arrive. But French is a mixed sequence of tense language, and there are some reasons for that. One reason which pertains to this question is that je lui dirai, the dire, is dire, say, and the Latin auxiliary avoir, and this means that the dire construction is, it used to be an analytic construction, and it's not, the will is not, the will has present tense in itself, right? So it is a different, there is a structural difference between, at least historically, between French and English. And the French future does not behave like what we would expect from a pure sequence of tense language. And it is actually well known that both German and French, they are mixed sequence of tense language. They have sometimes sequence of tense rules, but not always. While English and Norwegian have pure sequence of tense rules, and Russian has pure non-sequence of tense rules. And English and German and French are kind of mixed. So I think that the data in French here is that you can say both. Je lui dirai quand il vient, ou je lui dirai quand il viendra.
May I ask a further question?
Yes, you may.
I also wanted to ask, how do you account for the fact that in many languages which you have surveyed and many other languages which have these conditional constructions, there are arealis or conditional forms in the antecedent, no, at least in the consequent and sometimes also in the antecedent, but in the consequent it's more important. Yeah. Are transparent the future plus past. It's would is will plus past. Yeah. French conditional, Romance conditional is also more or less transparent to French plus past. Yeah. And there are other non-Indo-European languages which have this absolutely transparent way. Yeah. And
can I answer that?
Yes. Well, I just recall Jatrido's famous article on the grammatical ingredients of counterfactuality, where she has a very good story about it. Yeah. And I was actually wondering whether you might incorporate it somehow.
Yeah. So indeed, both in Romance languages, but also in English, we have the would, which is the past form of will, right? So we see it in many languages that the main modal functor in these constructions can be decomposed into something with future and past morphology. I think I I haven't actually worked it out, but I think it is related to what we often see in these constructions is that if we don't assume that there is a future operator here, we have to insert a covert future. This happens every time we have a non-stative verb. So if John came, I would kill him. This is a present subjunctive, but it cannot be true about the present tense because it's a non-stative verb. So we need a covert future, right? But if we already have the future in the modality, then we can explain these non-stative constructions, which are of course extremely frequent. For the stative verbs, so if John were here, I would be happy. We don't need it, right? So there we don't need the future shift. But maybe for some historical reason, the non-statives were, I mean, that's the primary source for this construction. And then, I don't know, but since we don't need it when the state is, I don't want to postulate a future operator in the modality. I know that some people do that. For instance, Dudman in his papers from 1983-84, he said that counterfactual conditionals always have a future operator in the semantics. I don't think that's correct because of the statives. But I think it's generally correct, and it's always the case when you have a non-stative. So there is a link there to future tense.
Alexei Kozlov.
I wonder if your analysis can account for the fact that in French, the forms like Viendrait have also an interpretation of epistemic necessity. So he must have come.
According to my knowledge, he must have come.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe
yes.
In such, maybe if Ere is must, the modal base of this necessity operator can be filled on this course. Or
yeah. So thanks for the question. I didn't actually know that Il Viendrait has an epistemic necessity modality in French, but if it has, I guess it's compatible with this story because, as you say, the must operator here can be compatible in a Kratzerian way with different modal bases. So, for instance, an epistemic modal base or ordering source or whatever combination you want to have. So what I presented here is very general, of course. So you can fill in with more fine-grained modalities, and so I guess that is possible. The main point here would be that you want, if Il Viendrait has an epistemic flavor, so it's epistemic modals are about the present. So you want to account for why it has a present tense semantics, and then you want to check away the past feature of Viendrait. And that you can do with this system, right? So, but then you would maybe not have the ir operator which I have here, but you would have something similar. And there are, of course, different covert modal operators and different covert and overt modal markers in various languages. So the ir which I have here is general enough that it can be used in other constructions, but I don't know if exactly this ir will appear. What I have speculated a little bit about is believe context, and when the matrix is believe and you have complements, whether you want an ir or whether you want an ir in those cases, but this is open to future work, the details, of course.
Well, Nina?
For your talk, Atle, I just have a small comment on one of your examples. Can we see the Russian example with the model in the antecedent? Mog, right.
So it was
Yes,
in the consequent.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you said that we need, in Russian, we need this we in both parts of the construction.
I think that then you would, this is related to the previous question, I think, because I think you will have a different modal base there. But I haven't really looked at that, but I think there is a different modal flavor to the construction. And then the mock is really an indicative modal. And what does an indicative modal mean? It means that maybe it's an epistemic modal or something like that. It's a different kind of modal. And then you don't want the realis marking. So what I want to illustrate here is the prototypical subjunctive conditional with the realis marking all the way.
I have a question. You seem to start with formal models of language and then arrive at the conclusion like Russian is not a sequence of tense language, Norwegian is a sequence of tense language, French is a mixed sequence of tense language. But do such classes have independent verification if we abstain from formal models? How is pure sequence of tense language defined? Is it a prerequisite that such a language must have forms like a past perfect or future in the past? Are there pure sequence of tense languages without such cases, constructions? And probably are there pure not sequence of tense languages with past perfect and related constructions?
Okay, thank you. I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but ideally all languages would be non-sequence of tense. Because sequence of tense is really quite an ugly thing. Because in sequence of tense you don't have a one-to-one correspondence between morphology and semantics. So Russian is much cleaner in this respect, because in Russian you actually see on every verb the interpretation you want. So sequence of tense is something that, of course, we could imagine natural languages without sequence of tense rules, and that would be much easier. But since it's an empirical fact that, for instance, we have sequence of tense in complement tenses in Germanic, and we have to account for it, and it looks like feature sharing, and so something like feature sharing is needed. So the complement tenses under believe and say and things like that, those are the prototypical environments for sequence of tense. What I have explored here is that we can also apply sequence of tense rules in adjuncts. So I had the when adjunct, when it comes, which is not in the literature on sequence of tense. This is not a typical example. But I think it's a very clear example of sequence of tense nevertheless. And the reason we see it's a sequence of tense phenomenon is because of the will. In past tense in adjuncts in English, John was happy when he came. There is no reason to postulate sequence of tense because we don't have. We could do it, of course. We could say that we have sequence of tense, but we could also treat this simply as two independent deictic past tenses, and then the context tells us that, or the when conjunct tells us that these things happen at the same time. But with the will construction, this is the only way, as far as I know, to actually explain why we have comes in the when clause. So then I extend the sequence of tense domain, and now I want to extend it further. I also want to apply it to subjunctive conditionals. So I think it's a nice generalization. If you have to stipulate sequence of tense languages in the first place, then we want to show that the phenomenon is quite widespread. And I wanted to show that the buoy construction actually appears twice in the Russian construction because, and then this follows from the generalization that Russian is a non-sequence of tense language, then we can explain away the buoy in the Russian construction, which is, it doesn't have to be like that, but it's of course nice if you can make the generalizations valid for more and more phenomena. So that's the idea behind that approach.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one final short question. We started 2 minutes later, so we will have time. If nobody has a question, well, very short.
Okay, so if we consider examples like when we start to be instances of sequence of tenses in some sense, isn't it a bit dangerous, because we risk to mix two different phenomena, sequence of tenses and relative tense marking? Isn't it the case?
Yeah, but okay, so the alternative theory would be to say that John will be happy when Mary comes. So the alternative theory would be to say that English has a relative present. But that is also quite dangerous, because why doesn't English use the relative present in complement tenses? I know you want to say that English has a relative present in adjuncts. So that's a strategy I don't like at all, because we have the complement tenses show us that English does not have relative tenses or relative present, and that's why we cannot use the relative present in English complements on the past. But in adjuncts, we see here that we have something which, from a Russian perspective, would look like a relative present, but we don't have there is no relative present in English. So we have to explain it by something we already know exists in the language, and that is sequence of tense rules. So that's my answer.